My goodness, yes, the microphone works. Ladies and gentlemen, wow, this is very impressive. I'm very sorry to, well, I'm not really, but I apologize for interrupting your lunch conversation to introduce a very special guest and speaker today, Senator Shaheen, who is a long-standing friend of Europe, both from her personal experience, from her work, educational background, from her time in the Balkans, and has always shown a very strong commitment to transatlantic relations. Today, Senator, we are highlighting, as we try to do every year, an aspect of the European Union that is perhaps not very recognized in Washington, which is that we're not just a soft power, we're not just a commercial power, but that we actually do have a very active and vibrant common security and defense policy. As Vice President High Representative Mogherini said this morning, we have 7,000 people, men and women in uniform and civilians, in 17 missions around the world. Today we've had very, very good discussions with the think tank world, with representatives of NATO, defense attaches, representatives of the defense world and the diplomatic world, looking precisely at the interface between security, development, defense policy in a rapidly changing world. And I know that you are uniquely placed to address us on this today because of your role both on the European Affairs Subcommittee and you're also on the Armed Forces Committee, so you are the perfect person to do this. We're very grateful that you've taken time from what we know is a very busy schedule. I won't hide from you, I'm only here six months, that it has not escaped our attention that in the current political configuration in Washington, Congress seems to take a huge interest in international relations and foreign policy. We sometimes have some mixed views about this, but I must say we did greatly appreciate your intervention yesterday, for example, on Iran, and we look forward very much to hearing your remarks now. Thank you so much, Senator Shaheen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you all for that warm welcome. I have to say, you know, we are still adjusting, some of us are still adjusting to a new order in Congress. Those of us who are Democrats, who were in the majority in the Senate, are now in the minority, so we appreciate the challenges of the new order. I want to thank you all for inviting me today, and as a politician, I can tell you that I'm always a little hesitant when I speak to folks during mealtime, because I don't like to stand in the way of your food, but since you've already been served, I think I'm safe today. As the Ambassador mentioned, I have returned after a 2-year hiatus as the top Democrat on the Foreign Relations Committee's Europe Subcommittee. It's very good to be back, and it gives me an opportunity to again engage with all of you on the issues that are critical to the transatlantic alliance and to America and Europe's security. Just a cursory glance at the news makes clear that the transatlantic alliance is being tested like no other time since the Cold War. But these challenges have also created new opportunities. Victoria Nuland, who I understand you're going to hear from later today, put it very nicely. She said that our unified response has created the prospect of a transatlantic renaissance. Now, as we're all aware, one of the greatest challenges we face is renewed Russian aggression, on display along Europe's northern and eastern borders, and most notably and most dangerously in Ukraine. The good news is that the attack on Ukraine's sovereignty has been a wake-up call. It's ended post-Cold War complacency on both sides of the Atlantic. It has reinvigorated and given renewed purpose to the alliance and to NATO. Together, Washington and Brussels have already taken important steps to impose costs on Russia for its actions, to assist Ukraine, and to bolster the security of others. but there's more to be done. Sanctions must be maintained, and I was heartened by Chancellor Merkel's comment that sanctions should remain in place until Minsk II commitments are fulfilled. As we all know, Ukraine will continue to require generous economic support from the US, the EU, and international financial institutions like the IMF. Support to Ukraine's armed forces is critical as well, but no amount of security support can offset an economic collapse in Kyiv. When we approved the European Reassurance Initiative, the US, through Congress, committed over $1 billion to support the security of NATO members on the front lines with Russia. NATO leaders made important spending pledges at the Wales Summit last September. Now we need to make good on those commitments to increase defense budgets in order to defend against not only conventional military action, but also hybrid warfare, which requires rapid action and enhanced cybersecurity capabilities. But the challenge from Mr. Putin is not only geopolitical, it's ideological. He's mobilized a vast propaganda campaign against what he calls decadent Western values and Western-style democracy. But his alternative model looks strikingly like the old Soviet system, an authoritarian one-party state that rules through coercion and corruption. Mr. Putin's working hard to export his values to countries in the Balkans, and particularly Eastern Europe, exploiting popular unrest caused by the economic downturn. And economic conditions have in some places given rise to extremist parties, nationalistic, anti-immigrant, even neo-Nazi in some places. Mr. Putin views these parties as tools for undermining his alliance, our alliance, which, as many people believe, is really his ultimate goal. So we need to recognize and confront these challenges at every turn. The EU and the US need to go on the offensive to defend and champion Western values and democracy. Just as we did during the Cold War, we need to develop a new 21st century Radio Free Europe campaign to counter Russian propaganda, to infuse into many of those countries American and European ideas and values. The Ukraine crisis has focused more attention on European affairs than any other development during my time in the Senate. I think that's a good thing. And as a result, I think there's significant support in Congress for taking action to blunt Putin's aggression. There's also a strong pro-European consensus on both the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee and the Senate Armed Services Committee, on which I serve. And as some of you who are Congress watchers know, that's not always true, that there's a consensus between the Foreign Relations Committee and the Armed Services Committees. But we want a strong, cohesive European partner to join us in confronting Russia. Instability along Europe's southern periphery, stemming from conflicts in the Middle East and North Africa, presents another threat to Europe and the transatlantic alliance. In countries from Libya to Syria to Iraq, a breakdown of central authority has created a huge opening for ISIS and other violent jihadist groups, some of them determined to export their brand of terrorism to Europe and the US. There's notable cooperation within the alliance on counterterrorism, and we're also increasing our cooperation on counter-radicalism. But more can be done in both areas. And just as we must gear up in response to Russia to take that propaganda campaign to counter Putin, we need a better coordinated public diplomacy effort to counter the narratives of terrorist organizations in the media, especially in the social media. In addition, I have to put a plug in for having a comprehensive EU passenger name record system, which would greatly help prevent future attacks in Europe and the US. I know this is something that in Europe you're still trying to decide if you can support, but I serve on the subcommittee on the Department of Homeland Security here, and as we look at the opportunity to improve our collective ability to monitor and interdict the movements of terrorists, this is a real asset that can help all of us. Chaos across the Middle East and in Libya has also created an unprecedented wave of desperate migrants willing to risk their lives in order to escape violence and terror. The decision by European leaders to increase funding for patrols and rescue operations in the Mediterranean is a critical step in the right direction. I hope we will soon see a more robust whole-of-Europe approach to this crisis. And as I'm sure you know, in the United States, we have our own challenges with uncontrolled immigration. On both sides of the Atlantic, we need to take an effective, compassionate approach that addresses the root causes of migration: poverty, corruption, and violence. And let's be clear, the influx of migrants to Europe is not only a challenge for Southern European nations, it's a challenge for all of Europe. And the root causes, the growing instability in the Middle East and Africa, can't be addressed without transatlantic cooperation. Shouldering these new responsibilities and maintaining existing defense commitments will require sustained economic growth as well, on both sides of the Atlantic. As we've seen in recent years, increasing defense budgets and foreign assistance is doubly challenging in times of austerity. Economic growth, on the other hand, while it's challenging as we're looking at trying to increase defense budgets and deal with other social issues, it will really reduce social instability and the appeal of extremists. Now, the US and the EU have both come a long way from the dark days of the financial crisis, thanks here in large part to the Federal Reserve and to an increase in spending. There is currently debate about whether we should continue that, as I'm sure you know. And of course in Europe, thanks in no small part to the European Central Bank. And I think we're watching very closely the situation in Greece. We hope that a solution can be found that keeps Greece within the Eurozone. One of the initiatives on both sides of the Atlantic that would help bolster economic activity is a robust transatlantic trade and investment partnership, TTIP. We are at the beginnings of that debate here in Congress with the debate around TPA, or Fast Track Authority for the President. And I expect it will continue for some time in Congress. Now, finally, before closing, I want to touch briefly on Iran, because this is another place where it has been a challenge as we look at the threat of Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon. But the negotiations have also provided an opportunity, because transatlantic cooperation has been critical to bringing us to the brink of a comprehensive nuclear agreement with Iran. And I want to recognize the great cooperation not only among the P5+1 members, including the work of Germany, the United Kingdom, and France, but by all of our European partners. Europe's solidarity in maintaining tough sanctions has been critical in bringing Iran to the negotiating table and keeping it there. As we confront the threats facing our transatlantic alliance, we should also take heart from our remarkable track record of achievement. You know, I just had an opportunity with the rest of Congress to hear from Prime Minister Abe of Japan. And as part of his remarks, he talked about World War II. And there was a general, an American general there who had been one of the people who landed on Iwo Jima. There was also a young man who's a member of the Japanese parliament whose grandfather had been the Japanese general commanding there on Iwo Jima. And they sat side by side, they shook hands, they greeted each other. And the Prime Minister talked about the fact that as democracies, we are able to disagree, to put aside our differences, to work together, and to move forward and make progress. And it seems to me that that is one of the huge assets that we have as the Transatlantic Alliance. Over the last 7 decades, working together, we've risen to every major challenge: rebuilding Europe after World War II, maintaining a united front during the Cold War, liberating the captive nations of Eastern Europe, and integrating them into a Europe whole and free, and today standing united against the challenges of terrorism, of Russian aggression, of a nuclear Iran. Likewise, we must recognize the remarkable achievements of the European Union. As Roger Cohen reminded us in a recent column for the New York Times, in 2015, Europe is, and I quote, "a borderless market of more than 500 million people, between whom war has become impossible, so attractive to much of humankind that thousands die trying to get into it. A continent where entitlements, including universal health care, are seen not as a socialist indulgence, but basic humanity, and a magnet to states outside the European Union that long to be part of this security-conferring entity." Looking to the future of the alliance, I'm an optimist, and why not? The Transatlantic Alliance is the most ambitious and successful partnership in history. Whatever disagreements we have are disagreements within the family. Today, our alliance has a renewed sense of solidarity and purpose. And even as we face big challenges, we face them together. And I am confident that together we will succeed. Thank you.